Hey, CD. What do you want, Pixie? Knights of Guinevere's pilot just came out. Have you seen it? Yes. So? Where's the video? It's at the bottom of the list. I'm currently very busy working on videos nobody but me wants to watch. Do you just hate engagement, CD? Look, people scream at me when I talk about animation. Nobody ever screamed at me for talking about charm studies.
Were you expecting adventure? Were you hoping for fun? My friend, you're indentured and pleasures exempt from your tenure, so venture back down to your slums. Provided at generous prices, your worth is determined by your sacrifices.
Alright, fine. So it's no surprise that I fell off the Owl House pretty damn hard toward the end. I felt that the series, previously very sharply written and excellently paced, ended up dragging its feet toward the end, trying to tie up plot threads that never really needed to be tied up, while at the same time being completely averse to using Act 1 and 2 of any episode for anything useful or interesting. And I'll be honest, I was taking out my frustration with so many series doing that on the Owl House that I ended up being harsher to it than I probably should have. I even stopped doing regular animation videos and switched to doing whatever the hell I pleased. I decided to start watching shows and playing games I otherwise would have completely turned away from. Sometimes it turned up something that made me go, wow, that was really good, why'd I not try this sooner? And other times it made me go, well, at least it was interesting to write about. Then with fresh eyes and new perspective, I glanced back just in time to see that Knights of Guinevere had a teaser trailer that made me go, ooh, because it was doing some kind of weird psychological horror shit. And then the second trailer came out and I went, ow. Because it turned out to be Five Nights at Freddy's meets Disney World. Knights of Guinevere is a new animated show from Dana Terrace that comes with a fresh new 14A rating to incorporate all that body horror art that Terrace always liked to draw in between getting bounced across a racquetball court by Disney executives. The series takes place in a dystopian cyberpunk future ruled by a thinly veiled mirror for the Disney Corporation called Park Planet. So it's like Glitch gave Dana a budget to work through some frustrations. The work has been taken over by an elaborate mascot theme park with the face of it being Princess Guinevere, an android who is shown in the prologue immediately trying to escape from a small child who is leading it around on its own organs like a leash. The park actually uses a lot of these androids to serve as the mascot, like all the Disneyland actors got outsourced to ChatGPT. It's in doing this that one of them meets two girls named Frankie and Andrea, who fixes a broken finger for her, which in Adventure Fantasy World is like the sealing of a blood pact. Cut to years later, and the two of them are living in a rundown shanty in a sexless gay marriage when Frankie finds the same android abandoned in a garbage pile, with that creepy girl, now an elderly old woman, panicking that her real doll escaped again. She's in very bad shape, and her boss wants to sell her because she's really valuable for scrap, but Frankie thinks that maybe this is her chance to get a foot in the door of corporate cocksucking, and so steals her with the intent to repair her. On the way, they get harassed by a giant sword-wielding sentinel robot that takes the silver medal for the world's least intimidating monster. And that's it. That's the whole plot. People bug me to make a video about this show. I fucking can't. I mean, it's a modern 2020s animated show. It'll have as much story as an episode of a traditional episodic show in about 3 years. Most of the pilot is about building intrigue over creating a good 3-act narrative. It's the serialization pain train of all set up and no payoff. Most of it indeed feels like Dana's poking me in the back of the head going, "Are you creeped out yet? Are you creeped out yet? Are you creeped out yet?" I get that it's horror, and so it has to create dread through the unknown, except there isn't an unknown. You gave away that there's an evil corpo before Cyberella even showed up. Cyberella, wow, that's an obscure reference. I could also describe the show's aesthetic as like Epic Mickey crossed with Kaima. It hangs on a lot of shots of a rundown, not Disneyland, that has at some point stripped away its own whimsy in the name of cutting costs. Like fast food joints that at some point tried to make themselves look like upscale cafes that just so happen to be cheaper to maintain. The entire park has a grimy, rundown look to it, the friendly, marketable exterior clearly meaning more to the company than the park actually being enjoyable. Frankie seems to be the character Dana put a lot of herself into, a visionary whose ideas are completely ignored or squandered by the corpos at the top of the food chain, and who now has to begrudgingly slum it in the garbage heap with the lower classes, but nonetheless still looks up at that big tower with wide-eyed envy and longing. Clinging to a dead, long-discarded relic of the idea of the park she's kept in her head since childhood, she literally finds her childhood nostalgia in its garbage. Anyway, Frankie's girlfriend, friend, sister, Frankie's roommate, Andi, is actually working Frankie's dream job, and there's a cute little moment where she's trying to fix a horribly scuffed robot, and while she can't get it working, Frankie diagnoses the problem without even being able to see it, showing that she's a prodigious visionary being held back by the system. Ugh, finally, the Fountainhead is going to be in Kingdom Hearts 4. CD, are you really calling this show objectivist? No, I'm just playing around. I do that. Sadly, Andi doesn't have as much to her as Frankie does. The show spends far more time with Frankie, with Andi largely serving in a more supporting role. I'm sure once it's actually picked up and has new episodes, that might change, but at the moment I'm getting flashbacks to when the Owl House very slowly shifted protagonists as if nobody would notice. Andi's main vessel is to show that a sort of pseudo-classism is formed among the park employees, with Andi being a crownie because she works in the tower and has a high-tech bougie job, but as her living situation makes it very clear, the park has a sneering disregard for all of its employees and treats them all like shit. Have you ever met that socialist? You know, the one who keeps making up new microclasses like petite bourgeois and trying to claim that service workers and entertainers aren't real working class compared to miners and factory workers, and freely engages in the manufactured consent fallacy? You know, that asshole? That's what I get from people who shout crownie whenever Andi walks by like it's the new word for liberal. They can't go after the people running the place because they live in those towers, but the engineers and artists are close enough to them to project their ire and unhappiness onto because they just work in those towers. Like an impotent socialist whining about the libs so much they are indistinguishable from a conservative. Andi and Frankie are very much not on the same page when it comes to the Guinevere android, and she doesn't have the same wide-eyed nostalgia for the park that Frankie does because she's seen how the sausage is made. And like a lot of the characters, she's more concerned with getting money for the sake of her own future rather than fighting back against the corporation that owns the planet. In particular, she wants enough money to get on a ship and leave. And funnily enough, that's where this feeling of dread begins. What exactly is Knights of Guinevere? It carries a lot of anti-capitalist language, but it still orients much of its emotional heart around the nostalgic, wide-eyed wonder of a Disney adult who is clearly in for some kind of rude awakening, which makes it clear that this is largely a big vent piece about Disney. You know, like Shrek was. That in isolation is fine. Disney is a big corporation, and it doesn't need to be defended by randos like me, but it rubs me the wrong way, and I will fully confess it is for only one reason. There's an entire ocean of millennials and zoomers whose anti-capitalism begins and ends with Disney. Their objection to AI and censorship and stagnant art direction starts at Disney, and it never moves beyond Disney. And anytime an animated movie comes out at the same time as a Disney film, well, out come the monkey bots farming outrage. This is very much a parasocial hatred dressed up in socialist rhetoric. This isn't great because while Disney is a hotbed of corporate fuckery, it's also the point of hyperfixation for right-wing nutcases who want to make it the effigy for all their made-up crap about sanitization and wokeness because Disney as a corporation is ever so slightly more liberal than others. And millennial and Gen Z anti-capitalists fall prey to right-wing psyops with all the predictability of a dodo bird approaching a predator. Just this most recent summer, we saw people trying to play this fucking game by comparing an overly bloated evil megacorporation to another overly bloated evil megacorporation. I guess Inhumane Crunch is fine when it's a corporation you're not irrationally obsessed with. So the Disneyland motifs, coupled with all the class warfare shit, leaves a sour taste in my mouth because it's one of those things that's going to soar merrily over people's heads as they laser focus all their ire onto one corporation with acrimonious lust. And that was where I left the script, with the understanding that there wasn't enough here to make a video out of. It's certainly done a double backflip off the ramp, but because of how modern TV is done, we're gonna have to wait like 3 to 5 years before seeing if it sticks the landing or faceplants into the snow and breaks its spine in 5 places. But then, in a moment of beautifully dark irony, this video was saved because Fandom just had to do a fandom, and shortly after it came out, social media had a brief but noticeable explosion regarding Dana Terrace supposedly being transphobic. How it works is that while fielding questions, Dana was asked if Frankie and Andi were gay, and she said, "No, but you could ship whatever you want." Then she was asked, "Is Frankie trans?" And she just said, "Nah." And then for about 12 hours, Piss Baby subjected everyone around them to involuntary eye-based water sports until Dana woke up the next morning and clarified it. I myself received an anon on Tumblr, which I suspect was attempting to rope me into saying something that they could clip for drama purposes, trying to weasel around the issue by softly accusing Terrace of shutting down people's headcanons after having trans characters in the Owl House. Now, first of all, I've always hated this deeply entitled aspect of fandom, wherein people act like they're being censored or bullied when someone disagrees with them in public. Critical discourse getting shouted down with "let people enjoy things" or "the death of media literacy," heated enthusiastic discussions out of work being branded as fighting or discourse, and any statement from a creator that closes off a headcanon being branded as shutting down headcanons. It's all a very deeply entitled, greedy, childish performance from people who simply don't like being disagreed with, and now they've gone from harassing critical voices in fandom to harassing creators. Terrace did not shut down anyone's headcanon. She was asked if Frankie was trans and said no. Regarding the fact fact that she's made trans characters before, who were those trans characters? Rain, Whispers, and Masha, two characters who could at best be described as secondary. Luce, Amity, Ida, that guy from the Digimon reboot, and King are decidedly not trans. Terrace has had, up to this point, never made a trans character in a leading role. In fact, let's not beat around the bush. None of the cartoons that are praised for being genderlicious and trans-inclusive have had a trans lead character. I would have been quite surprised if Terrace decided to make any of the three leading characters trans, because we can't even get the actual trans people to nut up and do that. The idea that Terrace would decide to make a trans lead character when she, as a cis person, knows nothing about a trans experience and therefore is largely incapable of resonating with it is strange. How do you expect her to be inspired to make something she knows nothing about? People typically write from their own experiences, or based on what inspires them. Though they can value diversity, without that spark of inspiration, they can't dig right into the weeds of those stories in a way a main character requires. Also, it's pretty fucking gross to look at the decidedly butch character and go, oh, she must be trans femme. Like, yes, I know trans women can be butch, but how many butch trans women have you actually met? Strangely enough, Knights of Guinevere is completely devoid of LGBT influence at all. The two lead characters who live together and have been together all their lives got decidedly gal-palled by word of God, though I'm convinced that that's because Frankie is going to fuck the robot. No matter what else happens, remember where you heard this first. Frankie is going to fuck that robot. But nonetheless, while the pilot is completely barren in terms of LGBT characters, a lot of people seem to go in expecting otherwise, as if it was just a foregone conclusion. And from where I sit, the problem comes down to the fact that it's a glitch series. People have gotten it into their heads over the years that the only thing keeping their favorite LGBT cartoons from being even more LGBT is the studios. Anytime the execution of that LGBT rep was criticized, the inevitable cognitive dissonance of the fandom would take hold. Anything positive is the creator, anything negative is the fault of the studio, a belief that is held despite it being proven completely false time and time again. Studios give a flat yes or no. They wouldn't say yes to a gay secondary character, but no to a gay main character. That's not how they work. And they aren't that controlling or nuanced. Studios are afraid of getting ass blasted from rednecks who hate seeing any LGBT character, no matter their role. And how willing they are to engage in it lives and dies on how much the government officials who are supposed to approve their mergers are currently bleating about DEI. I've been pointing this out for years. If they said yes at all, the only remaining bottleneck is the creator, and creators make characters who interest them first and foremost. If Luz and Frankie are any indication, Dana prefers making futch or butch girls the protagonists of her work. I wonder why that could possibly be. But because so much of animation discourse is about redirecting any criticism of work, even minor criticism, away from the creator and onto a corporation, people weren't prepared for Terrace to make the exact same kind of show she'd made before, and with the exact same kind of character she'd made before, and the exact same kind of themes she'd made before. I'm not someone who pulls her punches on harsh criticism, but that criticism has to have merit to it, and there's a fundamental difference between sidelining minority characters in favor of the default, and simply not having them in the first place. It's pretty clear at this point what kind of show Dana wants to make. Fantasy horror about gender non-conforming women with a splash of anti-capitalism, nonetheless completely immersed in childhood nostalgia in a way that vaguely resembles waterboarding. Both her big shows are about that, with Cog's only real hook being that it also functions as the animation equivalent of retweeting a 10-year-old call-out post like it was just posted that day. That's not to say that it's unreasonable to expect her to hold up to her ideals about diversity, but you have to remember that what specifically inspires and moves her is going to always take priority. That's how inspiration works. It'd be like expecting Rebecca Sugar not to fill her next project with enough anime references to violate the square cube law. One thing that does add a certain fuel to that fire is that Terrace specifically went out of her way to say that people can ship whatever they want, but didn't say the same thing regarding trans headcanon. Well, it is important to point out, creators only ever say ship whatever you want because shipping fandom is a hotbed of harassment, bullying, and pedojacketing, and people seem to think word of God will calm it down. I have often watched creators deliberately avoid stating the identity their characters very obviously have just because they don't want to risk some possessive asshole ruining their ability to find new audiences by harassing people over them. This doesn't work, of course. People swap between word of God and death of the author based on what everyone agrees with them and will harass people regardless. Hell, we are looking at how a single wildly misread and overreacted to statement was turned into a big hotbed of psychoanalysis, claiming that the first Western animation showrunner to depict trans people with respect and dignity is actually a secret TERF, and even comparing her to J.K. Rowling. Are you fucking shitting me? I know expecting fandom and fan culture to not be a hotbed of delusional infantile idiocy is like expecting the sun not to rise in the morning, but still, creators only have to talk like this because they know their fans are angry, hyper-aggressive morons. Here's a harsh truth. For creators both big and small, the fandom is often the worst part of this job. No creator actually enjoys having a fandom, and those who act like they want to foster a loving community don't actually want to do that. It's just good for business to do that because placating you is how they get their budget approved to make the art they want to make. The Waitress is not actually flirting with you.
If you want cookies and carrots that have been placed out by parents, bid to make it apparent that Santa made it our parents, well then you'll need to reserve it, 'cause that's our premium service. We thought you loved your kids, perhaps their dreams just aren't worth it.